Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Even in these strange times, it's great to see the amazing stuff that independent cinema is doing these days. And if you are within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I am the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and talk about current projects, state of the industry, what got them started, and any sort of fun stuff we can think of, because that's just how we roll over here. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, and I would love it if you did, you can do so over at Apple, over at Spotify, and you can find all of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel at In the Seats. If you want to follow us on social media as well, that'd be great. You can find us on the Facebook, on the Twitter, and on the Instagram, either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One, with all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and probably most importantly, do not hesitate to visit us over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, where it all started, where our hardworking team, who I love dearly, is cracking away on all sorts of movie reviews, news, and anything else we can think of to entertain you kind folk during these incredibly weird time, because we all need something to watch, and there's always something out there to watch, and that's the one thing that we always try to preach over here. And on this episode, we got a good one for you. We are talking with the writer and director of a new film called Makeup, which hit VOD platforms yesterday, I think. And it is writer-director Claire Oakley, and it's a story of a young woman who is drawn into a mysterious obsession in a remote holiday park in Cornwall in the UK. It's a British film, when she suspects her boyfriend has cheated on her, and it's drama, but it's got a bit of a weird edge too, and it's a really visually sort of interesting and engaging film, and one of those more, I guess, little interesting gems that you kind of stumble upon in this job. And it is a female-driven film, which we love, and we talked to Claire about that and just sort of the inspiration of the film and how it all came together, and just sort of her life in this business, which really was kind of an interesting start once you listen to her. And we had a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for the time today. I appreciate this.
No worries.
No,
thanks for watching the film and getting in touch.
Well, I mean, first off, congratulations. I absolutely loved it. It really does create a very sort of intense I'm looking for the right word, because it's more than just a feeling. It really creates an intense atmosphere around sort of the story that you're telling. And I'm kind of curious, for my first question, can you walk me through sort of what the ultimate inspiration was for the story and why this was your first feature?
Yeah, sure. Can I just ask, is it a podcast that you're doing? Or...
Yeah, it's going to be audio only.
Okay, cool. And will you be like editing it as well? Like if I answer a question twice or something?
Only if something like that, or if there's like a pause or like a glitch, anything like that. I'm not going to take out any content.
Okay, cool. No, I wasn't worried about that. It was just, I was wondering really if it was like my voice going out into the world, or whether it was just going to be like written up or something.
It will be your voice.
Okay. So sorry, could you ask your question again?
Basically, I love the film because it really sort of creates this intense emotional bubble that these characters are in. And I'm kind of curious, can you walk me through what the origin of the story was and why ultimately this was your first feature?
Yeah, so the very original idea for it came like nearly 10 years ago, and I had a dream, really vivid dream, of following a girl through some streets in this like foreign town, and I could never quite catch up with her and never quite see who she was. She was kind of disappearing between every building. And I wrote that into a short film because it was something that really struck me. And I took that short film on a sort of development lab where filmmakers come together to do like a week of writing.
Okay.
And when we got there, when I got there, another filmmaker had read the work, and he had read it as something about sort of lesbian desire, which wasn't at all. Sorry, I'm going to have a drink of water. Which wasn't at all my reading of the story at all. So I thought he was quite weird and kind of ignored him for the rest of the week. But time passed and things changed in my own life. And I went back to that script after I came out and wondered whether I had unconsciously written something about my own desires before they'd even kind of become conscious in my head years before, and whether that guy had been completely right. And that was really enough of a spark to take that sort of thread of a story and develop it further into a feature, looking at repression and the way our minds play tricks on us, and sort of how we might be scared of our own desires.
Because that fear of desire and that really almost kind of manifests its way itself like it would in a horror movie. Like, this is a borderline horror movie in many ways, because there is that fear of the unknown, that fear of that thing around the corner that we don't necessarily understand, but we still have to look around the corner and sort of confront and face. It really sort of crafts a very visual experience that, at least for this kind of story, I can't remember seeing in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of use elements of body horror and thriller and actual horror sort of in amongst what is essentially a coming of age drama. But my aim all along was just to express the sort of heightened inner life of the lead character, her unconscious, her fears, her desires, her obsessions. And in trying to dramatize and visualize those sort of very interior psychological things, I felt like I had to allow myself to range freely across genre in order to express, those, her inner life. So I think that's why it sort of has come out as a enormous genre film. It wasn't something that I sort of aimed at from the beginning. It came sort of naturally from trying to tell the story. But I like the way that it plays with audiences' expectations, and we're so familiar with a lot of the tropes.
Yeah.
But in this film, it sort of wrong foots you perhaps because I'm using them in a slightly different way.
Was it always sort of your intent to make this something very visual? Because on one end, this is obviously a very personal story, and casting has got to be a huge issue to find the right people to sort of embrace the roles. But at the same time, just the mood and the setting, from just the way a lot of the countryside was shot, and especially a lot of the scenes at night, was it sort of by design for you to sort of create this juxtaposition between sort of the light and the dark as you're putting it all together?
Yeah, I really wanted the setting and the weather and the whole feel of the place in which she finds herself to act as a metaphor for her journey, really. One of the references that me and the DOP used a lot was this photographer, Todd Hiddo, and he's an American photographer, and his photographs are sort of often set at twilight, and the air is thick with mist or fog. There's like maybe one neon light through a window. They're quite spooky and nostalgic. And it's been said about his work that it feels more like a state of mind than a place. And that was something I was really interested in creating through the film, so that the place that she's in reflects, the journey that she's going on.
It's true, because there really isn't a sort of sense of linear time. It's just sort of those emotional, confusing moments of that time for these characters. And I love the two leads with Molly and Stephanie. How did you ultimately sort of come to that pairing? Because I can imagine that's something you probably pained over quite a bit in the casting process.
Yeah, I was aware of Molly's work before because she did a BBC TV series a year or so before we shot. And she was brilliant in that. And actually, whilst we were shooting, she won a BAFTA for her performance in that show. We had to sort of fly her off to London for one night and then force her back on a plane at 4 a.m. so she was ready for a shoot the next day. But I was aware of her work, but we had quite a traditional casting process. We saw about 200 young women, and so she did a fantastic self-tape. And then when we met in person, it was very clear that she had this sort of naivety and sort of lack of, it seemed like she could have this lack of self-knowledge whilst also being willing to go quite deep within herself psychologically.
Yeah.
And so yeah, she was perfect. And then with Stephanie, she came in and did quite a unique reading of, her character is a makeup artist, and Stephanie's reading of that was very different from a lot of the other auditions. She gave a very grounded, down to earth version of the character who I could really believe was on, living on the caravan park. And she had something very warm and nurturing about her as well. So yeah, she was great.
Well, they work absolutely great together, and I like there's something else about this film that just really stands out for me because I absolutely adored the music in it. And I mean, for a film like this that really is trying to create sort of this otherworldly bubble, it almost feels fitting that you have a guy who was in Portishead to do the music. And I mean, I love Ben's work. Can you talk a little bit just about getting Ben on board with this, just in terms of creating the right atmosphere musically that you wanted?
Yeah, we actually got him on board quite late because my idea all along was not to have any music, and that the sound design was going to do all of the work, and we were going to use the wind and the weather and the animals, and that would sort of be enough to express, what I wanted to express. But as we were cutting, we started playing around with some music, and we used some of Ben's work from Annihilation and Ex Machina as sort of to test whether it
Right.
might, well, to test sort of what music could bring. And it kind of took the film to another level because music can express emotion that sound design and a bit of wind can't quite reach those sort of highs and lows. So I really liked the idea of having music, and because we'd used Ben's stuff, we thought, why not see if he might be up for it. And we sent him the film, and he came to London the next day and had lunch, and we just started working together. By the afternoon, he was like in the edit suite, and we were working at that point on the ending, and we just kind of got set to work. So it was a really great experience, and he was very willing and excited about the fact that the sound design was going to come first and the music would be secondary to that, which is an unusual way to work, but something that he was really up for. And in terms of our choice of instruments, he sort of had ideas about instruments we could use that would sound like the wind or the weather or sort of feel part of the environment. So we used mainly this instrument called a waterphone, which was invented in the 70s and used to make sound effects in quite a lot of horror films. But it's also been successfully used to call orca whales,
Really?
actually off the coast of Canada. So it's quite a strange, kind of almost homemade instrument. And it sounds, watery and wind-like. And so that was mostly what we used.
And I mean, this is the kind of story that I absolutely love because, especially for people on the outside looking in, they don't necessarily appreciate or understand how much of small scale filmmaking will come from just asking somebody. because I mean, you're using his temp tracks, and it's like, wait a minute, why don't we just ask him? And then you get all this fantastic stuff, and I mean, that really sort of makes my heart swell a little bit.
I know. I mean, what have you got to lose? Only someone saying, no, I'm too busy. But, you know, it worked out. Ben was between projects and he had time and he loved the film. So it was perfect. And we said to him, you know, by that point, we had a very, very clear idea of what we wanted. All the cues were in place. It was already his work. So he was very familiar with what we were looking for. So yeah, I think from his point of view, it was something that just sort of was going to be in some ways straightforward.
It's the power of asking, like you said, you never know. And I mean, that does kind of dovetail on something else I wanted to ask, because when you're making something like this, I'm always kind of curious, for you as a storyteller, this is a film that obviously has a very personal story and has a very sort of clear line on when it comes to the characters, but when visually it does push a lot of boundaries, and it is playing ever so slightly in a few different genres. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, like, what is it about, like, not just this story, but I would say maybe any specific story that would draw you into it? Is it character? Is it the chance to sort of create a whole visual kind of universe, or is it a mixture of both?
It's probably a mix between the getting excited about the visuals and also the place. Like through my short films and certainly with this one, like the place and exploring the place myself and taking lots of photographs, like that has been a main source of inspiration. And that kind of comes to me first before the characters. Which is maybe why there's so little dialogue in most of my films. And yeah, because I'm very economical with the dialogue, and I'd much rather express something visually if I can, even if that sort of slips into a more surreal language. And with this one, that was quite hard because it's a character who has a lot of feelings, but she's struggling to express and comprehend them. And so it worked to have to be economical on the dialogue, because she wasn't able to explain what she was going through. But hopefully through some of the visuals, like this repeated motif of the sea and the feeling that there's a shot in the film where it's a sort of sea at night. We shot it with a drone, and there's a sort of wave building under the water, and that threatens to kind of, come over you. And that was something that I sort of remembered from when I came out. I remembered this feeling of, like, before I was able to express it or sort of speak about it, I had this feeling of something kind of growing and building and being quite overwhelming. So yeah, it's just sort of trying to find ways to express feelings that are quite hard to put into words, and that really excites me.
And I love how you mentioned still photography, because I mean, in many ways, those can tell stories in and of themselves. And this is something I always like to ask. Like, when you were younger, was there sort of a moment or a movie or like any sort of piece of art that sort of made the light bulb go off in your head and go, okay, this is what I want to do. I have to tell stories and I want to tell them in this way?
Yeah, but it was probably sort of doesn't add up with the with the film, but
Oh, that's fair.
It was probably Toy Story.
I love it. Okay.
I'm a big animation fan, and like one day I would love to make an animated film. But when Toy Story came out, I guess I was like, I don't know, a young teenager. So at that sort of age where I was old enough to understand like the mechanics of what it might take to make a piece of art like that, and to tell a story. I mean, I do think Pixar are like absolutely brilliant storytellers. So I was kind of able to like see what they were doing for the first time, and understand how brilliant it was. And yeah, that I sort of, that really excited me, and I started like collecting the Pixar short films on VHS and stuff like that, which, you know, I haven't, until then, I really wasn't like a film geek and wasn't that into cinema. And still, I sort of don't count myself. I definitely I'm not someone who like knows the name of every director and every film, but with that film, I really fell in love with the process and the craft of it, really.
Do you think that, I mean, because I love that you say that, because people expect people to be fans first and to have seen everything and to sort of have this sort of rich lexicon of just fan knowledge before they would maybe go in to start telling stories on their own. But as you say, you didn't necessarily have that. And I'm kind of curious, do you think that helps you when it comes to a film like this? Because obviously this is a very personal story. It's a coming out story. It's a coming of age story, but it does play on a level that allows it to be very sort of universally accepted. Like even if you're not a young girl coming out, you can, like, anybody can sort of see your film and go, okay, I get it. How important is it for you to be able to tell stories that don't necessarily work for the specific audience maybe, but will work on a much grander scale?
I mean, that's wonderful that you've said that, because yeah, it's been, you know, we've released the film a couple of months ago in the UK, and it's been great seeing how many different people from different ages and different groups and different genders and races who have enjoyed the film. And that's, you know, something very special. But in terms of when I'm sort of developing a project, I think like my background is in literature. Like that's what I studied at university. So it's still studying stories, but it's, you know, it's novels. And that's probably what I'm more familiar with than cinema. And so maybe some of the, you know, the desire to tell a story about an interior world, and using almost poetic type images, maybe that comes from having studied a lot of literature and poetry, and yeah, maybe that's sort of filtered down more so than cinema particularly.
How
I
do
don't
you
know,
think those?
it's hard to tell where your ideas come from.
No, because yeah, because I mean, we've seen, especially in the history of cinema and films, plenty of books adapted to the screen. Some work, some don't. I'm kind of curious, where is the, because there's obviously a, you know, there's a middle point where they can translate and work together, but it doesn't always sort of meet in the middle, I guess is the right way to say it. From your perspective, like if you will see something that was a novel that gets translated into a film and it doesn't necessarily click on all the right levels like the book did, where do you think people generally get it wrong?
I don't know. I feel like it's such a personal thing because, you know, if I've read the book, and books are so rich and
Right.
dense, and it's very hard, I think, to adapt a whole book that would take you, I don't know, 60, 70 hours to read, and adapt that into 2 hours. You know, it's you're going to lose a lot. And if there are threads in the book that I've loved that I don't see in the film, then, you know, that might feel frustrating. But then for someone else, maybe the filmmaker has picked up on the exact things they loved about the
Okay.
book,
All
and
right.
it's satisfying for them. So I don't know. I don't think there's a simple answer. I think sometimes, especially with biopics, where you're trying to tell like the whole life of someone,
Yeah.
it can be really hard in the same way that novel adaptations are tricky if you're going to take the entire thing and try and cram it down. But if you just pick, you know, a small portion of it or one storyline, or just reduce it in a thoughtful way, then maybe that is more successful than trying to sort of, you know, make it a bite-sized version of the whole thing.
No, and you're right. And I mean, and I think that has been done in a few cases. It's just it's always something that kind of fascinates me because it's, you know, they're both very similar languages, but I've always been very kind of amazed at how how they don't always meet up as well as you think they would. I think that's probably the right way to say it.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, part of the big challenge with this film and the script in particular was how are we going to express her thoughts and feelings and these things that are going on inside her head. And obviously on the page in a novel, that's really easy to do.
Right.
And if a character's lying in bed for 4 days and thinking, in the novel that can be like a very rich and exciting read, but in a film that's going to be terribly boring. So I think it was, if you can find ways to express that inner life, then maybe it would help in adapting a novel. I'm particularly interested in it because I'm sort of adapting something at the moment. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Well, and it's the constant struggle of conceptualizing the words into images, because sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's a little more abstract and it's a little more complex than at least we give it credit for in the initial moment.
Yeah, I mean, when I was making makeup, I sort of had a rule, or like at least at the beginning of my notebook, I had just written like in big letters, like trust the images, because I think it's easy to overanalyze things and question them and fear that if you put an image of the sea, a dark image of the sea and a wave building, that it's not really going to express what you want it to, or different people will see different things in it. But I think yeah, I just tried to trust the images and trust that they would get across what I wanted to get across, and I think ultimately they did, and so that gives me a lot of confidence going forward for my next thing, that the ideas that you have that might seem a bit abstract or sort of left field can work to drum up empathy and feeling in the same way that a piece of dialogue might.
And I mean, I think that's a good note to end on, because I love that you say trust the images, because as much as movie making takes a village and it's a group effort, the images is really, at the end of the day, what I guess you as a director and even as a writer would have the most control over, because that's what you have to put on the screen to sort of get the point across, because it's not a question of leaving the script in the hands of the actors and letting them do their performances. It's something that at the end of the day, people are going to the movies or putting something on so they can watch something, because it is a visual medium as opposed to sort of a written one. And the visuals always have to be so incredibly important in the process of movie making.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely note to end on, because I feel that very strongly.
Well, you've made a beautiful movie, and I just want to say thank you again for the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the chat and the interesting questions.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.